to Webinar Wednesday here at Lulu. Thank you so much for deciding to spend some time with us today. I am so excited to have you. Very excited for this presentation. Always excited for our presentations, but I think this one will be very fun. We have not done this topic yet, and I think it's summertime in case your thermometers and your sweat and your shirts didn't tell you that already. It is summertime, and we're all taking a ton of photos and hopefully traveling a little bit. So I wanted to bring Jeremy in to talk a little bit about what you can do with those photos to really give them their best shelf life. So you see Jeremy is joining me here in the corner. I will kick it off with a few housekeeping things and then turn it over to him. And let's see who gets the gold star today. Kim, good morning, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us from Oregon. Hey, Mary, Velda, Molly, Eve, Larry, Laura, John, Davin, and Patrick. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Looks like we've got a great smattering. I always get that wrong, but you're coming from all over the place and we love to see it. So if this is your first webinar with us, we welcome you. Thanks for having us in your home, or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So we will record this. The session is going to be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. I will post a link as a sticky message so you can find it there. Everyone that registered will get a copy of the recording. So if you have to join late or leave early, no worries. You will get the presentation in its entirety. So as I mentioned, we are here. Oh, and Jeremy is kind enough to answer questions at the end. I see that several of you have found the chat. Right beside is the Q&A only tab. Please drop your questions in there, and then we will grab them at the end. So we are here today to talk about photography and best print publishing practices for photographers. The alliteration game is strong today. So I'm going to turn it over in just a second, but I want to welcome our guest, Jeremy Janus, who is just a fantastic photographer. We have been fans of his work for a long time at Lulu. I will tell you a little bit about him and then turn it over. So Jeremy moved to Colorado when he was 18 and struggled with depression, anxiety, and suicide contemplation following high school. Ultimately, the wilderness helped him through the dark times of his life that included losing a friend to cancer, breaking his back, almost dying from the subsequent surgery complications, as well as several other transformative struggles. Jeremy did not pick up a camera until he was 30 years old and immediately became obsessed with photography. The years he spent in darkness quickly turned to light as he started taking and sharing photos of his experiences. Really excited to have him to share some of that story and his tips for creating beautiful print products with your photos. Jeremy, welcome to the webinar and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and welcome everyone as well. So I started in 2016, September of 2016, almost 7 years ago now. So the day I picked up a camera, I just kind of like started going crazy with all my adventures, and I had already been doing that for years. But now I'm fully ingrained in it, and I've taken over 100,000 photos in my first 7 years. So that's kind of my background in it. I'll talk a little bit about why, I know what I'm talking about as far as print goes. I do a lot of different juried shows, festivals and galleries, kind of across the U.S. and then abroad a little bit as well. And I've done over 100 of those since 2019. So I started doing that work in 2019. Kind of slowed down in the last year just because I kind of started shifting my focus a little. But I specialize in fine art for my photography. So I do a lot of dye sublimated metals, which are basically a print that's ironed into the metal, and then it has a very crazy vibrancy and color character to it. I also do a limited edition collection that I just started, and so I've been printing for pretty much my whole time I've been doing photography. But it's a lot different too when you go from doing large format printing to kind of smaller format printing as well, with books and calendars and such. In 2022, I had a 35-piece solo exhibit in the airport at Denver International, and that was a 35-piece acrylic exhibit. So I've done kind of every different medium that you can print on as well. So I know kind of printing across the different platforms. I've exhibited in Atlanta International Airport the last couple of years, and I have been published from Nat Geo, Nikon, Outside Magazine, Outdoor Photographer Magazine, and then the National Park Service. I also did a project with Google Maps this last year with National Parks Week, and kind of launched their new features on Google Maps as well. So I do a lot of stuff digitally on Instagram and Facebook, but print is really my forte, just because of the fine art side. And I have 2 hardcover books that are published. One was Intimate Isolation, which I printed at the start of 2022. And then I also did one on my exhibit, the 35-piece exhibit I had in the airport, which was Colorado Through the Seasons. And that was a 35-piece exhibit. So basically it just matched my entire gallery that I had in the airport as well. And then I've also done 4 ebooks. I'm not really going to touch on ebooks. Ebooks are kind of a different animal just as far as like publishing guidelines go and such. So maybe down the road we'll do something with that. So I'm going to go through the agenda. So we're going to touch on organizing your photos and kind of your catalog and such, picking a theme for a book or a calendar, and like really going through the planning process on that. I'm going to go through a little bit of technical editing. I'm not like teaching a photography class here, so I'm not going to go crazy on that end. But I do want to touch on a couple things that I feel are very important as far as printing goes. Talk about design and book distribution. I'll touch a little bit on margin. Margin, honestly, you can go into your own entire class on that, as well as marketing. I'll just kind of touch on some of the things that I've done on that end, which has really helped me to kind of find my own success in this. And that's what I'll touch on at the end, which is just finding your own version of success in printing, which is really going to be totally up to you. So I'll talk about just organization first. So honestly, I feel like organization is one of the like key things you can do as a photographer. When you start getting into thousands upon thousands of photos, it gets really difficult to manage these different projects, because then as you start progressing through your projects, you have a lot of other files that start like kind of creeping up on you too. So you really got to kind of have your own like organization system. So I have over 4 terabytes of photos now. Like I've got full hard drives, so I have multiple hard drives on my desktop. And I really just kind of, now I've gotten to the point where if I go out on an adventure and I come back, I'm actually dumping everything onto my hard drive right away. I actually broke a laptop, and a hard drive went down on me last year during like festival season. So it dropped out of the front of my seat, crashed, and I lost a good like 5 or 6 like really crazy adventures that I had. And so after that, I really kind of set myself up with this system where I'm just organizing everything. I'm putting it like on my hard drive right away. And then you're not even worried about it failing or whatever, because you have that backed up. And then I also have a cloud storage as well. So I use Backblaze as my cloud storage, and that actually comes in handy very well because you're backing up as you're doing your work on your computer anyway. But you guys can see on the left, I kind of have some of the different files that I had. So these were my calendars this last year. So I actually came out with 3 different calendars. I had one for nature photography in general, which was basically all the stuff I had done across the US and just really the world. I had one for Colorado because I am based out of Colorado. I love my home state, and I have a lot of people that support me in my state. So I try to do something special for them as well. And a lot of people like Colorado that don't even live here as well. And then last year I started doing a lot of wildlife photography during my time down in Florida. So I kind of put together this wildlife calendar, which was very outside of the norm for me, but I wanted to offer people kind of something different on that end. So when you start splintering into these different projects, you really start adding a lot of files. I mean, so one of the things that I do on my calendars, and I highly recommend this as well, is I put the location of each spot for these photos, because inevitably I have had people reach out asking like, hey, where's this photo taken? Where's this photo taken? And it's like, you know, by the time you get into May and June and you get all these emails and texts and stuff from people asking where that photo was taken, it's just like, it's overwhelming for you too. So I think being able to kind of create your own template through Photoshop really helps. And like really understanding how those are going to print as well. You know, you have rings down on the bottom of the actual calendars, so you have to accommodate for that. And then that's where like printing proofs really comes into play. Like you can't just send something out to print without having run print proofs. And I'll touch on that a little later, but I've had quite a few mistakes over the years with that too. But really just as far as like organization goes, I really just recommend just start splitting all your projects up. I have every single book and ebook all in their own files, and those projects probably have 10 different subfolders in each one of those. And then that goes into the different files you're pulling for pictures, text files, all that kind of stuff. As far as like actual organization with my designer, I do use a designer, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But basically we use Google Drive. So even Google Drive has a really nice system where you can set up the files and then use the sub files as well. And those really help a lot. Being able to kind of just pull from your desktop and go straight into Google Files and really not have any like, loss in translation is really nice too. So you just got to find what works best for you and your designers, if you guys do use those. And just, whatever makes your workflow easiest is what I highly recommend for you guys. So planning a book or calendar. So this is where curation really becomes a hard thing. So when you have a ton of files, it's really hard to kind of narrow down on your own what you want. And this is where I really highly recommend, like, if you guys don't have a page for your photography for, Instagram and Facebook, I highly recommend it, because honestly, like, I find out what people like a ton through that. I mean, I've had the special privilege of also doing art festivals, so I can really talk to consumers and figure out what they like and all that kind of stuff. But then I also think that Facebook and Instagram is a really good like training wheel spot for you, where you can really find out what your consumer wants and what you're interested in. So it's kind of one of those things where you want to listen to your consumer and you want to follow what they do go after and what they do like, but then you also have to have this other side, which is the artist side of you. And I think that for me, I always typically will put what I like and what I want to put out in the world above the images that other people necessarily like, because it is something, especially if you could connect personally with a photo that you're taking or that you've taken and it does have that special place in your heart. I think you're able to actually tie a story to it a lot better. And the storytelling piece of it, I can say this without a doubt, like, once you tie a story to these photos, it can actually evoke like a personal emotion in people. And that's really what draws people back to you and your photography and everything else. My whole like story and life and everything is so intertwined in my photography. Like I literally cannot separate the two anymore. So, even now when I chase storms and do a lot of lightning photography and stuff like that, it's, like I have always taken that on, that, like, because I went through such dark times in my life, I am able to be a light in darkness for others. So I print a lot of stuff around, even just lightning and stuff like that. So when you're going through your curation process, it's kind of just finding what's like very personal to you as well. So that picture on the left is kind of cool. That was actually when I had the 35-piece exhibit in the airport. We printed out like over 100 photos and just sat down, and it was like, okay, what are your photos that you really like and that you think can like really personify Colorado through each season? So I had winter, summer, spring, fall and so I had eight photos essentially for all of them, except one had like 7. And so after I went through this and really narrowed down what I wanted to do as far as each season went, then I actually took a list of really, probably a group of like close family and friends, like close to 50 people. And I actually emailed them all and I was like, hey, this is the list of photos I'm thinking for each season. What would you guys put in your top 8? And so I kind of narrowed it down that way. And then after that, I went through and realized which ones I really loved personally, and it didn't really matter what everyone else thought. So I was kind of taking that into my own effect on that side. So I think you have to have this balance of, you want to do stuff that's going to appeal to people, but then also you want to do stuff that is really near and dear to your heart, and also like separates you as an artist, right? Everyone has a camera now, so everyone's a nature photographer. So it's one of these things where, you have to do what is going to separate you from people, and really like just personally, you have to decide what you want to put out in the world and what you want to be known for. And when you start looking at it that way, I think the curation process becomes a lot easier. And your first time is like, it's so hard. I mean, quite honestly, my first book actually came out of kind of laziness. So I was doing a lot of art festivals, and at the time, like I still was so new to it, and I wasn't really, versed in what I was doing. And I had so many people coming up to me, and they were like, "Hey, can you tell me the story on this?" And so, when you have 30 different photos in your booth, it's really hard to kind of separate your time and keep going to each different person. So I started making stories for each and every one. So I made these little 4x6 cards underneath each photo. And so after that, I was like, well, I have all these stories done for all these photos. Why don't I put a book together over my first 5 years on my 50 best photos? And over that time, I had taken over 65,000 photos by that time. So really just sitting down and having the discipline to say, okay, well, these are the photos that you love, that you do really well with. And quite honestly, there actually is some carryover into my second book, which was going to be my first book, which was Colorado Through the Seasons. Colorado Through the Seasons, I actually was going to have done in 2020 because that's when I was going to have the gallery go up during COVID. And it got postponed basically for 2 years. So that's why my first book came out before my second book. But there is some overlap between the two books too. So I think it's just like figuring out, those processes and what you want to put out as far as what you're curating, and it's a long, like tedious process. And your first time like curating something is so stressful and it's very overwhelming. So just don't let like analysis paralysis really set in with you. Like if you get too overwhelmed, just walk away from the project a bit and say, okay, well, like, what do I really want to do with this? What do I want to put out there? And just really like centering it around like one theme is huge. Like when you get further down the line after you curate something or whatever, and you actually start looking at, there's a lot of legwork on the back end with even just categorizing your books and such. So when people go into search your stuff, like if you have a book on Colorado, there's, say there's 1,000 books on Colorado. Well, if you have a book on nature photography, there's 1,000,000 books on nature photography, right? So the more you narrow down your subject matter, the more people are actually going to gravitate toward that. So when people go to keyword, Colorado, your book has a lot higher chance of actually popping up in that versus something in nature photography. So I think really like focusing on one subject. I really love my first book and I'm very proud of it, but also like I wish I would have narrowed it down a little bit more and just like either did something in the United States or whatever. But it's all a learning process too, and that's something that I think all of you need to take into effect is that your first time doing this is not going to be perfect. You're probably going to make some mistakes along the way, which I made like more than I ever could imagine. Like I've told people, like I can write a book on writing a book. It's like insane how much you learn. But I think you just need to learn like what your process is and really also having like a realistic timeline for your production of it. So, I mean, I reached out to my designer in November of 2021. And, I said, hey, I want to have this thing done by Christmas. And she was like, no, like it's going to be like January, February, which ended up being true. So I actually appreciated the fact that she was much more realistic about a timeline than I was. And when you start getting into like proofing and proofing prints and really kind of starting to send your book to production, it becomes even more like key to have like a realistic timeline on things because you can really start pushing. I mean, your delays and everything, and then it gets stressful too, right? If you have this capital outlay on your books and you're like, okay, well, I hired a designer, I needed to pay this down, I need to pay that down. Like it can get very expensive too on just the setup costs and really getting things into distribution, getting rolling too. So that's where I say, I think you really need to break down and understand your margin before you even look at doing a release. So the great thing with Lulu is Lulu actually has this setup where it's like you can price your book on basically what your book's going to cost to print and then what margin you're going to have after the fact as well. And so you really need to think about that. And then also you need to think about futures. So, I mean, during, COVID in the last couple of years, well, you'll set your book at, say you were making, $5 margin on one of those things, well, the cost of printing went up, whatever. Well, now you're making $4.50 per book, something like that. So you really have to start looking at like kind of thinking in the future as well of like, okay, well, you don't want to deteriorate your margin completely. And then also like when you get into global distribution, if you decide to go that route, you know, with different publishers or whatever, you also can have this problem where like with global distribution, you want to be in big box stores. Well, you have to have a returnable book as well. So if you know you're making $5 a book and you have 5 or 6 books that end up getting returned because they weren't selling from this place, then you're going to have, you know, that deteriorating your margin as well. So like it's good to have a holistic view of the actual distribution process if that's the route you want to go. If you just want to sell to your family and friends, like that's totally cool too, or even just your following. But just understanding the way the margins are kind of working on your book. And like I said, I don't want to like have this crazy margin analysis with everything, but you really have to like kind of figure out where your margins are lying with what you're putting out there too. And that's what I was saying with like, you know, just kind of figuring out your end goal as far as distribution goes. I think that's really key because it plays into your margin analysis as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about technical editing, not crazy like I mentioned. Like this is like totally, you can get into an entire class on photography for this. But you can see in the sky, I have all those little circles. Those are all dust spots. So dust spots are really prevalent. They start showing up after an aperture of about 5.6 and above. So the closer you get to f22, the stronger those dust spots are. And these actually drive me nuts. I see them on Instagram almost every single day, and you know, you really got to just watch your editing process and make sure those are gone. When you get into like book editing, the worst thing I could ever imagine is actually going to print a book or even say, you know, 10 books and you got those out in the world and you got dust spots in there. And, you know, not everyone's going to notice them. Obviously, that's kind of a thing that you pick up over time. But if you do have them in there, then it just like goes back to your brand, your image, what you're putting out in the world and what you're, you know, kind of showing others, like what your technical aptitude is. And, you know, and then obviously too, there's going to be like younger photographers or other photographers that look up to you. So if you're putting this stuff out there, like that is a reflection of you and your work and your process and what you're doing as far as like being a professional goes. So I think it's really important to kind of go through your photos and comb them and make sure everything is as like picture perfect, like sorry for the pun, as they can be. Another one is in the sky, you can actually see where the color banding starts. So color banding is basically when you have it, like, you know, if you're going from warm to cool colors and there's a strong transition in color gradient. Well, when you start to like basically have a lot of clarity or you pull a lot of texture or dehaze, it'll start creating this band that'll go across the color gradient. Well, when you go to print that becomes very saturated because of the ink, and it can actually show up as like a really strong line. You don't want that either. So just knowing and understanding kind of the technical aspects of photography and the way that translates to print digitally, like digital is great. Don't get me wrong. Like I think it's helped me grow as a photographer. It's helped me grow my brand and my outreach and all that stuff. But at the same time, there's nothing that can supplant print. And when you go to print, you really have to understand the way your images are going to go from a digital platform to a print product, because the printing is really, I feel that's what separates photographers, because when you get into the printing side of things, it's really, it's just a whole different game. I saw someone ask what software I use for editing. I use Lightroom for like 99% of my work, and then I also use Photoshop for a lot of my night shots or parts where I need to clean up just really dark spots that have a lot of noise in them. Again, that goes back to printing. When you go to print the really dark spots, they can actually still show up as like, they'll start showing up as like a lighter or really a darker purple. It looks like a smudge on a piece of paper, but that's actually because of the noise in those dark spots too. So those are the two software editing programs that I use. Other one, blown out highlights and exposure issues. Those are really key. Like I see that a lot in clouds. Like a lot of people kind of blow out clouds, and I feel like the most important thing you can do as a photographer is make sure that your composition across as the whole is really it's visually pleasing to the eye. Like you want it to where it's very well rounded. It's very um, even to the viewer. You don't want anything that's really going to detract someone. So like, I mean, the dust spots is a perfect example. But if you have something that's kind of on the focus on the side of a photo, which happens a lot with clouds, and that's what's pulling people's eye to it, then it just makes the image very unappealing, in my opinion. And people get distracted by that. So then that's their whole focus when they go and look at that image. So I think you just got to really kind of hone in your editing process and make sure that your editing and technical editing, it can be a little stressful. Like you can go on my website. I have a couple YouTube videos on editing for technical aspects. So if that's something that you want to look at, you can. And then another one that can pop up is hot pixels. And this is like lesser known, and a lot of people, honestly, unless you're doing a lot of night shooting like I do, like a lot of like lightning and night shots, you can run into this. But basically your camera will start burning up when it goes these longer times of exposure, and you'll get either red, green, or blue dots in your photos. And so those can be really tedious to take out. I mean, some of my photos, it'll take like an hour to go through and actually comb through all the hot pixels. But and those will kind of vary. Sometimes they'll show up in smaller format prints. Sometimes they won't. I've had 40 by 60 prints that I've done, and then I see the one like green dot in there, which usually isn't a big deal for consumers, but for me, it drives me nuts. So you really just got to watch those as well. But yeah, you just want as perfect of an image as you can get before you go to print. And then, so really just zoom in, fine tune it, hone it, be meticulous in your editing process and really what you want to put out in the world too. So understanding print quality. So this goes back to a little bit centered around global distribution. So the thing that's great with Lulu has like the highest print quality. So they have the highest print quality out of any publishers that I have. And so they use 80-pound paper. It's glossy. It's got a great light glossy cover as well, and then use premium inks too. So everyone that I've ever had ordered through Lulu, I actually have not gotten one complaint off of any of my Lulu prints, which has been just like phenomenal. It's almost like, having that peace of mind that you're not worried that something's going to go to print and then you're going to have a customer complain about it. When you get into global distribution, as I have with some other publishers, you start having to sacrifice quality for the distribution aspect. And so the problem with that is you start looking at 40-pound paper, you're looking at, kind of subpar ink sometimes. You can tell the binding, that's another thing, like Lulu's binding is great. And sometimes with like some of these larger distributors, the binding won't be the same. And there's just like a lot of problems when you go that route. So it's a catch-22. It's like, do you want to have a reach that you wouldn't have otherwise, or do you want to focus just on the quality aspect? So, and that's, again, like I'll talk about later, but it's basically finding what works for you. You just have to understand that. And quite honestly, I recommend printing through a couple different publishers just to see them. You'll notice it night and day. Like I can literally get 5 books at home, and I know which one came from Lulu and which one came from other sources. And so you really just have to understand the way the printing process works, the way global distribution set up. If you decide to go that route, like quite honestly, it's pretty crazy because Lulu's standards are actually too high, so they can't go to some of these like subpar like distributors, which is it's a great thing as well. But you just have to go through a different process if that's the way you want to go. And again, like if you just want to sell to friends, family, just kind of your smaller following, then like that's where only having something like Lulu is great because you're not worried about the quality at all. It's always going to be there. If you want to get into larger scale distribution, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and all that stuff, then you have to start looking at that other side of things. And also, like I said, like you have to be ready for that. I mean, I got a complaint last week off of someone that bought a couple books off of one of my global distribution partners, and unfortunately, it's not like more or less it's not fine art printing when you go from when you look at dye sublimated metals, you're looking at thousands and hundreds and then thousands of dollars to print certain sizes. You know, when you go to printing a book for $20 or whatever it ends up being, it's not going to be the same. But then that's where like kind of your consumer perception of you is where it becomes a difficult thing, because some people will expect, you know, and I've had this happen multiple times, but they expect my books to look the same exact way as my metal prints, and it's not even the same platform. So some of that is just kind of educating these people and being like, hey, well, this is a book that's actually made for distribution versus, you know, trying to do a fine art print. It's just a completely different process. So just really understanding the differences in print quality will help you tremendously over the long haul. So design, if you are not a designer, in my opinion, I highly recommend like hiring a designer. I actually was going to try and do my entire, like my books myself, and I started getting super overwhelmed. And then actually, again, it was the whole analysis paralysis thing where it's like, it stopped me from producing my books at a quicker rate. And so I had a buddy that actually, he had been printing through Lulu for years, which is why I ended up with them in the first place. He does a lot of children's books. And he's like, hey, you know, I have this designer. He's like, don't do that. He's like, you are an amazing photographer. He's like, you're not a designer. He's like, you don't want to deal with bleed margins and, you know, all the other stuff that goes into it. And I said, yeah, you're right. So the only thing with designers that is kind of tough is the capital outlay. So, I mean, my designer is basically like $1,500. So I would pay $750 at the start of the project and then $750 at the end of the project. And so the only problem with that, right, is you're gonna have, you'll have $1,500 outlaid over, you know, 3 or 4 months to produce a book, and then you're not really gaining that back right away. So, you know, it's just going to take time. So if you have this longer term vision and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to save up this money to pay this designer so that I'm not so worried about making that money back right away, then it's awesome. And I can say 1000% that for both my books, I use the same designer, and she was worth her weight in gold. Like I actually, the other 2 books that I do want to still produce, hopefully later this year, I would actually still be using her as well. So I think that if you don't want to spend your time doing that, you're going to have so much time and energy basically on the curation process, on making sure all your prints are up to snuff. I didn't really talk about this on anything either, but I will say it right now. So all my books, print books, everything is exported at 300 DPI, which is just the dots per inch. So there's a way, like if you use Lightroom and you know the image size of your photo, you know, you'll have all the sizing. So as long as you understand the sizing and what you need to go into like a print book, like if you have an 8.5 by 11 inch photo and you export out at 8.5 by 11 inches at 300 DPI, that's going to get you, obviously, you know, most of your photos are going to have words under them or something, so it won't be exactly that size, but making sure you're basically exporting your images at the highest quality to actually go to print. And so I think that's actually a very good like key to kind of center yourself around as well. This is actually why like I wouldn't recommend going and making an entire book from your cell phone camera photos, because cell phone cameras, they look great on screen. Again, like digitally, they look amazing. But then when you go to actually print those, you'll have those actually blow up. They'll be pixelated. There's a lot of issues on that end. So really understanding also like how a digital file transfers to print is very key as well. And yeah, editing, I would say, is like probably the most cumbersome side of it. And make sure you you have your edit, like just have 15 people read your edits before you actually go to print. I had that happen quite a few times where I was like, okay, cool, I caught the last of them. And then I had someone else read the book and it was like, oh, well, you had this typo or this doesn't sound right or whatever. And so you'll end up having a lot more edits than you actually expect. And in the end, like, I mean, I had to have sent my designer probably like 10 different versions of the final book. And then even after I had done a couple like print proofs, I noticed more stuff, and then that went back. So again, like I said, like having that realistic timeline about how long it's going to take to actually print these is very like crucial for you just in the long haul. So book distribution, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but again, like I said, like figure out what your goal with book distribution is. That's gonna help you figure out your margins and where that all lands. And the margin side of things, you're gonna kind of learn like trial by fire. I mean, it takes a while to understand the way like book distributors work, and like if you do want to go down that road of getting into Barnes and Noble and understanding how to go, like all the Barnes and Noble signings I've ever done, I actually went and like hand sold all of them. But your book has to be set up in a certain way to where you have like they're returnable. The margin is where they want it to be. There's quite a few different factors. So when you start getting into mass distribution, things change a lot. And then even like getting in with libraries and all that kind of stuff, that's all hand selling and going to these people and having something that's pertinent and that they want. And so like you really got to kind of work from the back end, forward. And so like for me, my biggest thing has always been just touching as many lives as I can through my story, through that end of things. So I am willing to sacrifice a little bit on the quality side in order to get, like sell books overseas or, places that I never imagined, or touch people's lives that I never imagined. I mean, I've gotten so many letters from so many people on like, oh my God, thank you for sharing your story, and that always like means more to me than anything. So on that book distribution side, that's where I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit on the quality. But then also like, especially in the States and everything I do domestically, it's awesome to have like Lulu there where I'm like, okay, hey, you guys are on my website, go to this link through Lulu, and you're getting basically the highest quality book that you can, So again, that's just kind of a personal choice, and it's a catch-22 if you do decide to go that other direction with global distribution and all that. But and also like more than likely you're not going to become a millionaire selling books, so that's where it's like, okay, well, maybe focusing more on quality and keeping it smaller makes a lot more sense. You're not telling you now, like with the way margins work and everything else. I mean, I think my first book, I'm probably just getting to the point now of paying off the designer and a bunch of the other costs associated. I mean, Lulu.com is awesome too, because you actually get a free ISBN with them if you when you publish through that site. So that helps a lot. I mean, the ISBN and barcode, you're still looking at another $150. So there's a lot of other aspects to it that go into it that you're gonna have to like start. You just figure it out as you go, and things change. And I unfortunately had a really big mess up at one point where I had to change the price and the ISBN on something that was in global distribution. So you're paying another $150. There's so many things that can go wrong with global distribution. So if you do decide to kind of keep it smaller, that's where, and even like, kind of stepping out into the waters and being like, okay, well, I'm just going to do this through Lulu to start and see where it goes. And then like a year down the road, you can start looking at these other avenues if you want as well. But again, you just have to figure out for you, like where you want to fall on that spectrum. And, most things are catch-22 too. So you just got to kind of look at it from all different angles. And then this is where kind of like finding your own version of success falls into play. For me, the biggest thing through my entire photographic journey, honestly, like I probably should have never become a nature photographer. And had I not had like my really deep, dark years with depression and anxiety, I probably wouldn't have been on this earth anymore. But B, like I also like wouldn't have had the courage to finally, after years of painting and hiking and going through nature, finally picking up a camera and then getting to that comfort level of sharing with people. So for me, my biggest thing is just being able to share my story, be able to tell people, hey, like no matter how dark your life gets, you still have an ability to turn your life around and become someone you're proud of and someone that inspires others. And I've had the good fortune of also being able to prevent people from committing suicide. So like there's this really crazy story of being able to be out in front of people. And so that's my most important thing. Like obviously I hold like quality printing like to a different regard as well, but I also want people to see and hear my story and understand like you can really come from these deep, dark places and change your entire life and the world around you too. And so that's what my version of success has looked like. I've done a lot of library talks. I do a lot of stuff, for like kids groups and just a lot of different colleges and stuff like that. And then I've also done like an Alzheimer's group, which is really cool because it's kind of like this group that really isn't going to be able to do anything that I have published in my books. And being able to explain that to people too, I think on a larger scale, being able to explain to people, hey, this is like a 6-mile snowshoe, or this is a 21-mile hike. Like there's a lot of stuff that I'm doing that other people like literally would never be exposed to otherwise. So, Barnes and Noble signings have been really big for me. I've been able to take my books and donate. I donated to the 3 Denver children's hospitals around. So I spent $1,000 donating books to that, and then just giving away books to random strangers too. Like to me, the more you can affect someone's life through art and photography, and even if you guys don't have the belief that you can do it, like show someone like the best picture you ever taken, or connect over photography or whatever, like share experiences, share stories. Like you'll change people's lives in ways you never ever imagined. And so I think that's where I know it's like very daunting and it's scary, and it's so much work to publish a book or a calendar. But once you do it, like it will change the world around you like you've never seen. You probably already have fans that you don't know about. Family and friends are the best place to start. Like, I have the most supportive family and friends on this planet. And honestly, if it weren't for them, I would have never had the confidence to keep going and keep trying to push myself in new ways. And then, eventually your confidence and your belief in yourself hits like this level where no one else can take it away from you anymore. And it's a beautiful place to live, because you just stop caring, about putting things out there in the world, because that's the only way that people are going to see you. So I think just finding your own version of success with it. I highly recommend too, if you guys are like dabbling in like printing your stuff for the first time, start with a calendar, just sell it to friends and family, see where it goes. And I think it's a really good place to just kind of get your photographic and artistic legs under you. So so I guess like that's all I have on that end right now, and just like open it up to questions.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to be vulnerable and share your story and just how impactful believing in yourself and publishing your work and putting it out there can be. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, the good and the bad of your past experiences to where you've gotten today. So a lot of questions have been coming in. I invite everyone to drop your questions in the Q&A tab if you haven't already. So Jeremy, you ready for some questions? I'll let you take a sip of water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, so Jane is asking, novice here, what is a designer and what do they do? How do you get one?
So designers, Fiverr.com is actually a great place. Fibbr, I think. But they have a lot of great designers on there. So I've actually hired someone for all my ebooks off of Fiverr. There's also like TaskRabbit and a couple other of these websites that basically specialize in finding people for these design jobs and such. But basically what they do, they'll take, if you say, hey, I want to take this book and produce a 50-page book of all my images of Colorado, or whatever, they'll take that and they're going to basically put that into a design form for you. So they'll figure out all your bleed margins. They're going to figure out, just basically all the specifications that are going to go into getting that book into publication. So like Lulu and all these websites, basically you send in a digital file form of all this, and it has to be ready to print. So that's what a designer is going to do, is actually put it in print form for you in digital design. And then when you go and send it to print, you're not worried about, the bleed margins and all that, because it'll actually come back to you and say, hey, there's an error in this uploading process. You need to fix this digital file. So when that happens, you can send it back to your designer, say, hey, I got this error. Can you please fix this digital file for me so that I can resubmit it? And then that's when you go get your proof copies. And so designers really make your life 1,000 times easier. Like I will say that till the day I die. best investment I've made as far as like actually producing a book. I swear I would lose my hair if I actually had to do all that stuff myself.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jane. And I think I was also surprised to hear how heavily the designer, that role played and impacted your project. Because you think, oh, you're a photographer or you're an artist, so of course you're going to design it. But when you're publishing a book, there has to be that fine line of like, what can you do? What do you want to take on? And what is going to save you your hair and your sanity and help you get the best book possible? So thank you, Jane, for that question. All right, Mary is asking, what is the optimal price point for margin per photo book? This might be.
So that's where it really depends. So I will say, like, I recommend you doing, definitely do research on like photographers that are similar to you or have a similar skill level or aptitude, and then kind of pricing your books off that. I mean, my Intimate Isolation, I have priced at $34.95, and my Colorado Through the Seasons, I have priced at $29.95. So I decided to go based off like basically image count. So my $34.95, there's 50 images in there. So you're looking at, you know, a little over 50 cents an image. And then, you know, you got the Colorado Through the Seasons, like 35 photos. So, you know, that's kind of a personal choice. I do have a very good name as far as fine art goes and all that kind of stuff. So I do think like people are willing to pay a little bit more for my work as well. And then it's hard too, because you can't go and price your stuff against like really mass distributed like book suppliers either. I mean, you're not going to compete with the largest book suppliers out there. They're putting stuff out for, you know, $15-20 for this crazy image book, and you're like, oh my God, my stuff can't compete with that. But it can. It's just you have to find your little niche for your audience too. So I think just doing your research on that, and you know, if you're, I mean, $10 margin on a book is really high. So like, you know, basically keep it down below that, but don't be afraid like to have confidence in your work and say, hey, my work's worth like paying this much either, you know?
Yeah, that's great advice. And thank you for that question. Next question is, what is an optimal number of pages per book?
I think it depends. I mean, like for me, like I really do like the 50 pages because I feel like there's so many different stories intertwined in those as well. I'd probably say like, honestly, like my Colorado Through the Seasons, 35 pages, and I probably wouldn't go below that image count, but that's like a personal thing on my end. Like I feel like you still want to offer enough value to someone where they're proud to have your book on their table, and like if they open the book and there's 10 images, like I mean they could all be mind blowing, right? But at the same time, it's like, well, I wish I had like a few more to show people or whatever. So I think like having a good like portfolio of work within each one. Like I probably wouldn't publish a book with 100 pages in there, you know, of photos either, you know, because I mean then you're starting to look at like your time, cost, energy of actually producing that as well becomes like an astronomical level. So it's kind of, I don't know, for me the sweet spot's been 50 pages, and like my other two ebooks, I have one on Florida and one on storms, and everyone keeps asking me to post the storms one, but I'm just lazy right now, and we're busy. And so I think though that there's 50 images in both of those, and I think that 50 image point for me is really key.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. And Bob is asking, you were talking about what software you use to edit your photos. So Bob was asking, when you said Photoshop, do you mean Photoshop or Photoshop Elements?
No, like regular Photoshop. So you know, Lightroom is basically a dumbed down version of Photoshop. It's just more dealing with lights, colors, shadows, you know, kind of everything that goes into it without going into like really super heavy editing. And like I said, the only time I really go into super heavy editing is really with like Milky Way shots, with really dark storm shots and stuff like that. It gets really hard to pull the darks out without like degrading the image quality, especially with like noise and stuff like that. So some of those, like when you go into large format printing, you really have to make sure that stuff's perfect. I mean, I printed stuff where it's like, oh my God, I couldn't even see this digitally, and then it printed, and you have that issue. So Photoshop's like a really good complement to it. But honestly, even now, you know, Lightroom, I mean, I swear by Lightroom because I've used it my entire career. they keep coming out with new things. So now they have a denoise AI that actually like it cleans up your image so well for a lot of the noisy spots, which didn't even exist 2 months ago. So I've been using that more. So they're always constantly improving the software, and I think personally as a photographer, it's the best investment I make on a yearly basis.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Bob. All right, the next question is, do you recommend hardcover or softcover for photo books?
I highly recommend hardcover. I think it totally separates the book. Like, I would hate to put like my finest images in like a soft cover. Like to me, and I read a lot. I mean, like 30 books a year. And so like to me, like soft cover are very much like, hey, this is a quick read and whatever. Hardcover, like, so I actually have my hardcover books, like my Lulu books sit right next to like a 60 by 90 print that I have in my house. And so I love being able to show, like, honestly, like there's really not a huge degradation in the quality that you see on the smaller format book cover, because the glossy book covers on Lulu are amazing. So it's like really a piece of art in its own right. So I think like hardcover books just like it just totally changes the whole flow and feel of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, who doesn't love a hardcover photo book? It can really elevate the presentation, like you're saying. But you're the professional, so it sounds better coming from you. All right, and let's see. You touched on 300 DPI, but yeah. So would you say that exporting your pictures? I know that at Lulu we always recommend 300 DPI. But I know that you mentioned that's where you export your photos. So is there any need to go any higher, or is that a good spot to be?
No, 300 is good. And then honestly, like I don't even believe like Lightroom, I don't even think you can export it, but well, you can kind of artificially, but basically like that's their like max that you can export at that size. So I mean, I don't really think you need to go above that. And quite honestly, even with like some of the large or smaller format pictures, you're probably not going to tell that much of a difference. But I always think it's better to be safe than sorry anyway.
Definitely. All right, and Mary's asking, what's a good hourly rate or project rate for a designer? I know you mentioned what you're working or what it costs for you to work with your designer, but is that ballpark or any suggestions for that?
I mean, I think you can go through and you can look at, a lot of the Fiverr and TaskRabbit and all that stuff. They actually have like different ratings on all these people. So you can look at the reviews on them and see. I think that ends up becoming a personal point because even, my designer even raised her rate from my first book to my second book, but I loved working with her. So I was fine with paying a premium for her. And I felt like her work was quality too. So to me, I was fine with paying more than I probably would have another person. But I think you have to figure out, and obviously all of us have different budget constraints and stuff like that. So you can find people that might do a cheaper rate, but also you might not get the same quality of service. You might not get the same kind of response time. And response time is huge because I will say when you start getting into edits and you're trying to pump something out and get it done by a certain date and all that kind of stuff, that's when it like paying a premium really makes a difference because they're more willing to do things for you like on the spot. If you're paying them $10 an hour or something, they're probably like, that can wait till tomorrow or the next day or something like that. So I think that all kind of comes down to like a personal thing too.
Yeah, and he gave the reference or the resource of Fiverr. I dropped some links in, but just because it's called Fiverr, you should anticipate spending a little bit more than that, I would say.
Yeah.
All right. And then can we talk a little bit about your trim sizes of your books? So we've got a question of what size do you recommend? What trim size? And do you go portrait or landscape for your photos?
So and this is where I'm not going to go too deep on trim size because again, I hired a designer for this exact reason. I do not want to deal with this stuff. But basically like my book's in an 11 by 8.5 format. And for me, I highly recommend that. I mean, that's like, I believe that's the biggest size Lulu has, correct?
I think that you're right. I can check that.
Yeah. So I think it is, but basically everything I shoot is really in landscape. Like I have a couple images that are portrait, but I just like my groove and my flow is in landscape mode. And so like I also don't want to ever change the way I'm flowing in nature. So I always focus on that. Like I would never try to go be like, oh, I'm going to put together a portrait book, even if I just want to be different, because I don't shoot that way. So again, I think that goes back to kind of a personal preference. But I think with nature photography, or even photography in general, I think the bigger the better, because people actually can appreciate the amount of detail that comes out in that image too. You know, like I that's why I love large format printing. Like when you print something in a larger size, you cannot hide in it, and it's beautiful. It's like you're either going to be great or you're really not, you know. And so like give people the chance to really appreciate what you're doing out there, because that's the only way photography, in my mind now, is really appreciated. It's not appreciated on a phone. It's a totally different experience.
Yes, I agree with that. And so our largest landscape size, well, it's A4 landscape, which is a little bit longer than an 11 by 8.5, but a little bit shorter, or not as tall as well. You can find that on lulu.com/products. All right. And so Natasha's asking, you answer this with your page count, but how many photos do you publish in a book? So is it the best rule of thumb to put one photo per page, or can you speak to that process?
So it ends up being a little different. So like I had images, and that's also, this is where like having a designer is so key, because I can tell you, I started messing around with the way I was going to put my images on pages, and it looked like a child threw like a bunch of paint on a wall. And then my designer sent me what she envisioned, and I was like, oh my God, like this is exactly what I wanted, but I couldn't do it, you know? And I normally don't have that problem as an artist, but like that was like cool for me to see as well. So you know, I have some that actually bleed over two pages. And then this is where you start getting into the trim sizes and everything else, because you do have to start truncating down pictures. So that's where a designer is really key too, because especially like with mine, she understands my work and my workflow very well. So she knows, okay, hey, like I can cut this image down, but maybe not this one. And so she'll put, there's some pages where she has two in one page, and then others where she drags another like across two pages with the words on the side and stuff like that. So I mean, just to give you an idea, my page count for my 50 photo book is 70 pages. So it will end up being like quite a bit longer than you expect, especially with like, you know, there's actually a lot of publication requirements as well that end up coming into play, ISBN, all this other stuff, like copyright stuff, which, you know, Lulu does a good job of outlining those. But your book will end up being a lot longer than the 50 images or whatever.
Yes, and thank you for that question. We're coming up on the end of the hour. We have two more questions that I would like to get through if we can. So Kathy is asking, since we're speaking of hiring a designer, should she also hire an editor? And how does that different from what a designer will do for you?
So an editor, I highly recommend, if you don't have a lot of like friends and family that are like really good in that. My mom was like so crazy with my English when I was younger, and I've admittedly gotten away from that a little bit. But I have a really good flow as far as words go. And also like, so this is one thing that I didn't want to lose when I published both of these books, was I didn't want to lose my voice. So I decided to not hire an editor on purpose, because I didn't want my words being changed, versus when people actually read my book. And I've had many people tell me this, which is when I read your book, it sounds like you talking to me. And I love that aspect of it. But if you don't have a lot of friends and family, like, because that's all that edited mine, if you don't have a lot of friends and family that are very well spoken, then I would say hiring an editor is probably worth it. And like going forward, I probably would look at doing that. But again, I really enjoy being able to speak my truth and my voice through my images. So I think it just depends, like kind of on a personal level. But also hiring an editor is probably the best thing you can do too, because you're going to miss so many things. Like there were like little words that were like just, you know, intertwined, that were just off by one letter or one word or two words like back to back. So an editor really would be worth its weight in gold too. And honestly, editors aren't that expensive comparatively to a full designer too.
Yeah, I definitely second that. Editors are a great investment. Call Jeremy's mom. Okay, so I'll take one more question and then we will close it out for the day. So this question is from Terry. You did touch on this a little bit, but he's asking, do you use an ISBN number and registering it with the Copyright Office? Can you speak to that process?
Yeah, so there's oh God, I wish I remembered the name of it. There's like an official actual ISBN, like,
Oh,
you know,
Bowker.
yes, that's it. So you really need to go through them, and then they actually have. It's very similar to the Lulu process. Basically, you're taking all your metadata that you're registering with like Lulu or any of these other companies, and then you're going through that process. And then they actually sell. They also sell ISBN. Like, you can buy ISBNs in bulk if you're planning on doing multiple books, and then they also sell barcodes. Barcodes are clutch too, because like if you do go into mass distro with like, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of those, they're going to require you that you have a barcode. So you can buy both of those in one, and I think it's like 150 or something like that to have both of those.
Yeah. So also great to have if you need it, if you are going through global distribution or if you plan to sell your books to retailers, an ISBN is mandatory for that process. And I think that will end this for today. Jeremy, I dropped your Instagram in, but is there any other website or anywhere else that folks can follow up with you or stay in touch?
Yeah, so basically like Facebook and Instagram, I'm very active on. It's just at Jeremy Janus Photography. And then my website is jeremyjanusphotography.com. I have a lot of photography resources on there. If you're looking to get into photography, take some classes, learn through YouTube, and then just like a lot of my fine art stuff as well. So you can see just kind of what I'm talking about as far as like print goes and some of the print quality that I do with my work as well.
Yeah. All right. Great. I just dropped the link to your website as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I did see a question. Can I share the replay with others? Yes, please do. This has been a fantastic presentation. Jeremy, I can't thank you enough for just taking the time to share your insight and your best practices, getting a lot of love in the chat. So excited to see that. Follow Jeremy on Instagram. I love his Instagram. I spend probably too much work time looking at it. Psych, I'm just kidding. But it's beautiful, as you saw today. He is a fantastic artist and photographer. So show him some love. I also dropped in the links to his books on Lulu if you would like to check those out. Jeremy, any final thoughts before we let you go?
Just never stop exploring and, go inspire the world through your own work.
There you go. You heard the man. We'll end it there. Well, thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us today. I hope that your morning, afternoon, evening is fantastic. I appreciate you being here. Jeremy, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. And we'll see y'all next time. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you guys.